Coming up on Theater Talk.
Have you studied the actual Checkers speech to do this?
I have watched the Checkers speech about 9,000 times.
We've made him stop.
And it made me stop because I was starting to turn into kind of like a rich little comedic. I'm not a crook. I am not a crook.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
My fellow Americans, I come before you tonight as a candidate for the vice presidency and as a man whose honesty and integrity has been questioned.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm producer Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
So we're a few days away from the election. It's either just happened or going to happen, depending on where you're watching this. And we want to talk about
politics.
Politics.
Actually,
yes.
We want to talk about a terrific new play that deals with what the country is thinking about now. Politics and how the media influences politics. Susan and I, of course, were big fans of Frost Nixon, Peter Morgan's terrific play about Richard Nixon and his battle with David Frost. There is a play that is about to open here in New York that is equally as compelling and exciting. It is called Checkers. Once again, it is about Nixon. We can't seem to get away from Richard Nixon, ever. And it stars terrific cast led by Kathryn Erbe as Pat Nixon. Welcome to Theater Talk. Directed by my good old friend and sparring partner, Terry Kinney. Welcome back to Theater Talk, Terry. Anthony LaPaglia, a fantastic actor who I remember years ago in the Arthur Miller play A View from the Bridge, where you were so terrific in that. And you play Richard Nixon.
Yes.
And the play is written, very fine play, written by Doug McGrath. Welcome to Theater Talk.
Thank you.
All right, Doug, as I said in the introduction, we can't seem to get away from Richard Nixon. Why?
No, you know, isn't it funny that all those years ago he said, I think it was in '62 after he lost the race for governor, that we won't have Nixon to kick around anymore. And yet, not that
Except you don't
kick him.
People are not kicking him around anymore. The same with this play, Checkers and Frost Nixon. There was that unbelievable hatred for Nixon for so long, and now as you look back on him, when you're analyzing the man's life, you have sympathy for him.
Well, I think the reason he's always been compelling is, and I'm going to use a word that may sound strange in connection with him, but he could never hide his essential humanity. And by humanity, I don't necessarily mean kindness. I just mean his humanness. You know, he perspired on TV. He was nervous. He lost his temper. He loved his family. You know, there were all these.
His suits never fit.
His suits never fit. He seemed like an unpolished, unperfect person like everybody else.
Right. Now, let me ask you, Kathryn, you play Pat Nixon, who fell in love with this man. And I believe, I don't think we have any evidence to the contrary, it was a real love affair with these two people had.
Yeah.
Playing this part and researching Pat Nixon, what do you think it was about this awkward, some would say scary man that she saw that no one else saw that made her fall in love with him?
Well, I think he was very kind and loving to her. And they had a beautiful family, and they came from very meager existences, and she supported him from the very beginning and believed in him and what he was trying to do politically, and I think they just came up together. They weren't young when they met, you know, as far as getting married goes in those days. So
they built their lives together.
They really did, yeah.
Very, very interesting, Terry. I have been to Yorba Linda and to the Nixon Library, and one of the things that I'll always remember is the story of Nixon driving Pat Nixon and her date to the dance.
Yes.
Extraordinary. You guys must have studied all this stuff to put the play together here.
Absolutely. Yeah, he drove, what's the guy's name? Teddy Marchand. Teddy Marchand and Pat to the dance because she turned him down, and Teddy didn't have a car. But it just shows his tenacity and the fact that he would never quit on what he wanted. He knew he was cunning in humiliating himself like that. He knew that he would win in the end.
Well, you have that great line where you say, as Nixon, or no, you talk about him driving you. He knew that he was going to have her in the car by herself on the way to pick up Teddy Marchand, and in that moment, by himself with her, he could get her. You have most of the Checker speech in the show. I assume that you have you studied the actual Checker speech to do this?
I have watched the Checker speech about 9,000 times.
We've made him stop.
And it made me stop because I was starting to turn into kind of like a rich little comedian. I'm not a crook. I am not a crook. You're starting to turn into that. So, but I was obsessed with everything. Everything, you know. Thank God for YouTube, because everything's on there. And I would find these small moments of, like, I found one piece of footage that was just before he was going to resign, and he was talking to some of the crew members. Yeah. But he was so concerned about whether his collar was ruffled or not ruffled, but much more concerned than any normal person would be. and just listening to the way that he would talk to, you know, the average guys around him, he seemed to be more comfortable.
Yes,
with them.
Absolutely.
He had to work hard. It was against his nature to make. It wasn't easy for him to make a human connection.
No, he didn't like
so he had to
people
really
very
push
much.
himself.
And yet his constituency, I mean, the people that he appealed to were the people from which he came, you know, the common people, the people without the money. It was the Ivy League
set that was.
Yeah.
And one of the points the play makes that you often think, oh, Nixon was, you know, his enemies were the Democrats. It was also the GOP establishment, the fancy pants GOP people who refer to him in the play as an oil stain, I think at one point.
Yes.
They made him suffer twice with Eisenhower. They did exactly the same thing to him in the second term.
Which was what?
Made him fight for the vice presidency again, even though he had, I think, quite successfully completed the first term.
I want to ask you, just to get into the directing and acting here, you're playing historical figures. How do you resist the temptation, as you said, to just do an imitation of them? I mean, it's got to come a point where you study Pat Nixon, you've seen the tapes, but then it has to become your own version of it, I guess.
I was terrified of that idea of trying to really become her. I watch these videotapes, you know, watch these YouTube things, look at these pictures endlessly, and then when I look in the mirror, I'm still myself, and I would get very disappointed. But you know, she was such a lady, and I think that a lot of what I'm doing with her has to do with that. Her physicality and the costumes and the makeup and the wigs help enormously for just kind of transporting the audience and me into believing that I am her. Yeah. And I just think about her heart and, you know, how much she loves him.
But you do take us back to a time where, I'm not to use a glib phrase, that women were so oppressed. And my sense of Pat Nixon, and you convey this, is she's always under this huge strain. And you have this in your play, because I don't want to give anything away, but it's a turning point. How profound her unhappiness is, and that she's just gulping it down, spraying her hair, and going on. And it's a sad look at an old era.
Yeah, and she believed in that. I mean, she really believed in this public persona and what people should be able to see and what they shouldn't. She didn't want to share.
Yeah, and you ask why she was with him. She had no way out in that time.
I think this is the feminist slant you're putting on everything. I believe she loved him. I think she loved Richard Nixon. I don't think she would ever have left him. They loved each other.
I do too.
It's not that she was trapped.
Let's just go along to get along. Get along to go along.
You know, I really think that they had a lovely family situation, and that the political arena was, for her, blood sport, but for him, he was addicted to the spotlight because he didn't have to have one-on-one communication that way. Right. And he lived in the spotlight, and she just eschewed it completely.
Right. I'm sorry, you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say another first about the Checker speech, because we were talking before, and it was kind of the first time a major political figure spoke nationally on TV to everyone.
To save his career.
To save his career. But I think, I'm not sure of this, but I have to believe that it was also the first time a politician whose integrity had been challenged used his wife as a prop to help him.
I don't believe that I ought to quit, because I'm not a quitter. And incidentally, Pat's not a quitter. After all, her name was Patricia Ryan, and she was born on St. Patrick's Day, and you know the Irish never quit.
And you know, you see now, like with Mark Sanford and people, some of the wives are like, help yourself, buddy, go on out to play all on your own. But Pat was, I think she was the first to have to do that. And part of what makes I think, the speech in the play so poignant is that she doesn't know what he's going to say. She doesn't know a thing he's going to say.
Well, as you make the point in the play, nobody knows what he's going to say. Eisenhower doesn't know what he's going to say.
Right.
America doesn't know what he's going to say.
Right. But for Pat, what he's going to say is, here's everything you could possibly know about us. Here are all our finances. And it was mortifying to her.
Yeah. It's interesting, I think, there's some real insight into his mentality with that Checker speech about he was not showing it to anyone. It shows you very early on he realized the only person he could trust is himself, nobody else.
Yeah, his acute paranoia, I think, came from a very early age. And by all accounts of a lot of the stuff that I've read about him, you know, everything that kind of fully realized itself in him as an adult was firmly planted in his childhood. You know, and the relationships. I've tried to explain to people that he didn't become kind of like this awkward, unlikable guy as an adult. He was like that as a kid. He was that kid in school where, for whatever the reason was, the way he looked, the way he carried himself, his demeanor, other kids would pick on immediately or would exclude immediately. It's a constant theme throughout his life, from a young boy to a teenager to an adult. And I think that once he got to the point where he got some power, you know, I think that there was some kind of enjoyment, I think, on his part of being able to inflict, I don't think it was conscious, but being able to inflict a little revenge, a little "you are wrong." Right. There was a lot of that going on with him at times, I think.
Yeah.
And but it's interesting because, you know, I didn't grow up in the United States during that era, and so my perception of Nixon was always been, the reaction from most people I get about Nixon was quite vitriolic.
Yeah.
I hate him. I hate him. I hate him.
Yeah.
Well, the more I researched him, and the more I went into it, and the more I have like Stockholm syndrome. I love the guy. I just think that he was so ahead of his time as a politician.
Yeah.
I think that some of the things, you know, the things that he tried to institute. We were talking on the way in about his national health care, you know, programs that he wanted to institute.
He would be on the left today.
He would be a Democrat.
He
He
would
would
not
be
be
a
a member of the Republican
well,
Party today. Oh, the old Nixon
Well,
haters. Still here,
and Terry, you
still
back
here.
me. I mean, all I can say is he tear gassed me and my friends on the steps of the Capitol.
Yeah, well,
he did some, and you know, let's not even go into the war in
Do you
Vietnam.
know, he took advantage politically of certain situations, and the fact that those riots happened at the Democratic convention, I mean, that was a misstep from the left to begin with. It should have happened at the Republican convention. So he was triumphantly saying, well, I'll stop this kind of. Do you get the idea that he was just using it as a political, you know, springboard? I don't know that he cared as much as he seemed to.
You've clearly studied a lot about him as well, Doug. Why do you think he understood more than before any other politician the importance of television?
Well, he was very smart. I mean, I know that's a simple answer, but he was very smart, and he was always alert to any opportunity. Communism was an opportunity. Yeah. And one of the things we were talking about the other day is that when he went after communists, he made sure he really went after a communist.
Oh, yeah.
You know, McCarthy just kind of hurled it out in all directions.
But was Helen Gahagan Douglas a communist?
Yeah, sure. Yes,
Was
she
she?
was, yeah. They'd all been members of the Communist
Do you
Party.
know what's interesting, though, is that my understanding is that communism is a very broad term, and the kind of communism that they were afraid of at the time was Russia.
Yeah, Stalinism.
Stalinism. And the people that were in the, say, American Communist Party, that was a very different, it was a very different ideology, actually. That communism was a different kind of ideology that they had. It was more along the lines of socialism.
Right.
But it still got branded with that name, you know, communism.
And many
So
people came to it out of the Depression when everything looked
Of
like,
course,
is our system failing?
Of course.
Well, then
But
the classic case, of course, is Whittaker Chambers, who was a communist, but then when you see what Stalin is doing, killing tens of millions of people, he leaves the party. And when I was a freshman in college, a political science professor brought Alger Hiss in to speak to us. It was fascinating. And Hiss was up there maintaining his innocence, and we all bought it because, you know, we were all nice little kids on the left at Columbia, and we thought he was innocent. And then you go and you read the actual files now, and Alger Hiss was a spy. It's irrefutable. I remember Hiss saying at those hearings, and again, this goes to Nixon's antagonism to that establishment. Hiss says to Nixon, Mr. Congressman Nixon, my law school was Harvard. What was yours? And Nixon then went back in his office and said, I'm going to get that. And he did.
That's all it would take.
Well, you know,
and that goes back to his feelings of exclusion and insecurity from the time he grew up.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
do you think he was cruel to her? Because in this play, there are a couple of moments where you feel he loves her, but he could just strangle her at some point.
I mean,
He came last night, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that may not be in tonight. You're experimenting a little bit. Tell us about that.
He was very angry last night, more than he has been. I mean, I don't really know. I don't really know. I think probably yes. I have steered away from really delving into that side of it.
I've read some accounts where there has been mention of certain instances where he lost the plot with her around journalists. You know, like on Air Force One, there was one particular incident where.
What happened?
Well, I mean, I don't know. They don't even go into the specifics, but she came over to join. He was sitting with a group of journalists. Oh no, actually, they were at some fundraiser at a Mexican restaurant, and he made some comment on how beautiful the flowers were, and she said, and quite innocently said, Dick, they're plastic. They were plastic flowers. And he was so mortified and so incensed that he they said you could see the blood drain from his face at the table. And afterwards, apparently, he gave her quite the talking to. But loud enough for other people to hear. But it was things like that. He could not handle being embarrassed in public, especially.
Well, one of the things that you capture in the performance in the play and the direction is he is so controlled and contained, except in certain moments when it comes out. And then you can see him immediately steps back and pulls it back in again and regains the control.
Right.
That was the man, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've tried to fashion it after addictive behavior. You know, it's and I think that informs the question about the marriage as well. You know, it was probably I assume they had moments of extreme marital bliss and domesticity, and other moments where the political arena leaked in. And
but all you have to see is the tape of Nixon at her funeral. He is weeping like I've never seen anybody weep.
And how do you interpret that?
I would interpret that as he loved her so deeply, and that when.
And he also felt shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a lot of. I'm sure he knew how much hurt he had caused. I don't like to tell you this because I know you don't. You know, you're a loving, good husband to her in the play and everything. But I don't want to disillusion you. But you know, he did. He broke her heart in many ways because the essential, what the play's about in a certain way, is this event, which was a crisis in their life. They came together because of the crisis in the beautiful way that people in a marriage can come together when someone's attacked. They succeeded, and then they both came out of it with the opposite feeling. He, I want to go deeper into this than ever. She, I never want to be there
Talk
again.
about the note. Can you explain the note?
Sure. Nixon wrote a note to her when Pat became so distressed about life in politics and the ugliness of it and the viciousness of it and the exposure, the loss of privacy it entailed.
So mortifying, yeah.
That she really poured her heart out to him and said, I can't take this life. I can't take it. And he finally, because he did love her very deeply, but in a very complex way, not an easy way, he wrote a note to her. And the note said, he said it's a promise. It's a legal promise. That's why I'm writing it
And
out.
that really happened?
He wrote it out, and he wrote, those are the words of that note in the play. I, Richard M. Nixon, promise on this date that I will, from this point forward, leave politics and never run a campaign or be in a campaign.
How did you find out about that note?
Book.
The book, and then
Richard Morris,
that would, of course, he ignored it completely, right?
And then he ignored it every chance he got. after that. There was never a single time.
Although if I'm not mistaken, don't you say at one point you keep it in your wallet? Doesn't he?
I put it in my. He says I put it in my wallet. And
I'm not sure if that's, most of the play is quite true.
That's playwriting.
But and also I have to say Teddy Marchand is not the guy's real name.
Oh, well, how come you changed it?
Because I didn't have the real name. I knew they'd gone for a date.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I all felt, let's leave that poor man alone, whoever he is. It's enough already.
No longer with us.
Also, there's certain things when you just have to compress, and I don't remember, because she did not have the note. I do know that. And it may be that he kept it someplace, but either way, he didn't keep the promise.
I want to say to people, you're not attacking Nixon. You don't take cheap shots at Nixon.
No.
But yet you're seeing the man that even if the so-called slush fund that he spoke about in the Chucker speech was not a criminal enterprise.
Right.
But now they would laugh at the notion of
Right.
that.
$18,000.
But still, there was something there in this man that led to him becoming the most disgraced president of the United States ultimately.
But
There was something.
The seed was
look
there.
at, even
Yeah.
when you look at that, though, when you look at Watergate, not long after was Iran-Contra, which was way, 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 way more duplicitous and evil than Watergate. It doesn't get half the play that Watergate gets. And look at the subsequent stuff. I don't even go back into the George Bush administration of weapons of mass destruction when they knew there were none. I mean, when you go back, relatively speaking, it's a misdemeanor.
Oh,
as
you
they
have
say.
gone so deep.
The Stockholm Syndrome is the best.
We got to get somebody to get you out.
I can't believe he's not on Mount Rushmore the way you described this man.
He should be.
Terry, when you're directing these two fine actors and they're playing these historical characters, I just want to go back to a question I had earlier. How do you keep them from spilling over into caricature? Because it's so easy to do.
We talked about that just first off, that we didn't want imitations at all, but that I thought it would be useful to study tapes of the real people. We're playing historical figures, and we need to show respect to that. But for me, the formula has always been the same for me, which is 60% you and 40% the character's positive feelings about themselves. But in this case, I said, if you find 1, 2, 3 physical traits that are a way in to this person, use them. Go from the outside in, but then once you're there, do it homeopathically. Use his voice homeopathically. You may have noticed Anthony's voice is sort of Nixonian already. And it's become more. It's become more that way as we've gone on because
like
he's
a burger,
merged.
please. French fries.
They've merged somehow.
Yeah,
That's not my doing.
But I thought it was interesting when you said you find the one big thing that she was a lady, and that's a real key to getting that character down. And for you, is there one particular trait that you fastened onto?
Yeah. Well, first his cadence and his voice, and secondly, he was just so uncomfortable in his own body.
Yeah.
He almost, it seems to me when I see him move that he has double jointed arms, legs, toe, everything is kind of, and he's twitchy. He has and his hands are very elegant. He was a quite accomplished pianist.
Yeah.
And so he has these when you watch him speak, like especially the Frost Nixon tapes, the original ones. His hand movements are so, refined.
Yeah, almost like a conductor.
It is. It's like he's conducting.
Yeah.
It's
and there's that extraordinary clip of him just before he resigns, where he's at a Billy Graham rally, I think, and he's playing the piano. Have you seen that? And
sort of feverish pleasure.
And he's like, well, he's double jointed, and you feel he's playing some old hymn or something, but his arms are moving as if you're a jazz musician while he's banging away.
That's really true.
Yeah.
He and Pat met. I'm not just doing this because your show is called Theater Talk, but he and Pat met at a play, meaning they were in a college play.
They were in a play. That's
Community theater.
Community theater.
Do we remember what play they were in? Richard III. No.
Dark something.
Dark Victory? No.
No, not Dark Victory. Dark something.
Dark future president.
All right, well, the play is called Checkers. Terrific new play at the Vineyard Theater about Richard Nixon's famous checker speech, starring Anthony LaPaglia as Richard Nixon, Kathryn Erbe as Pat Nixon, directed by Terry Kinney and written by Doug McGrath. Thanks a lot for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk.
Thanks for having us.
One other thing I probably should tell you, because if I don't, they'll probably be saying this about me too. We did get something, a gift, after the election. A man down in Texas heard Pat on the radio mention the fact that our two youngsters would like to have a dog. And believe it or not, the day before we left on this campaign trip, we got a message from the Union Station in Baltimore saying they had a package for us. We went down to get it. You know what it was? It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog in a crate that he'd sent all the way from Texas. Black and white, spotted. And our little girl, Tricia, the 6-year-old, named it Checkers. And you know, the kids, like all kids, love the dog. And I just want to say this right now, that regardless of what they say about it, we're going to keep it.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Loewe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Cory and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy STRELSIN Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.